Once again, under the disturbance of that nightmare, I welcomed the morning. My hands were still trembling slightly, just as they did in the darkness. I was a Vietnam War veteran, and some stories, buried in the deepest recesses of my heart, were tainted with an indelible darkness of bloodshed. Until today, I've decided to tell this story. On a night in 1960, two colleagues and I were assigned a secret mission to explore the twisting tunnels deep in the jungle, in search of enemies or traps. Yet, in that seemingly ordinary tunnel, we encountered an unforgettable horror. We groped our way through the dark, slippery tunnel, our flashlight's dim light and our own breathing being our only companions. It was an indescribable silence, as if even time had stopped. I could feel the tense atmosphere meandering among us, silently gnawing at our courage. The three of us were close together, as if this could offer some comfort to each other. The tunnel stretched out in front of us, like a bottomless throat, ready to swallow us. Just when we thought our ears had adapted to this silence, a sound pierced through it. A woman's sobbing, echoing in the dark, long and sorrowful. We stopped, exchanging glances with each other. Was the sound life or death? A trap or a cry for help? Our shoulders tensed, touching the taste of death. Deciding to track this sound, we unbolted our rifles, holding our breath and focusing. Every inch forward felt like surrendering to death. The tunnel gradually became narrower, forcing us to crawl forward. The woman's cries became clearer, as if getting closer, until we came to a small room where the smell of gunpowder had not yet dissipated. The room had a bright oil lamp, and some beds and military supplies showed signs of hasty departure. We stayed in the room for a while, looking for clues, but found nothing beyond what we could see in each other's eyes. The tunnel didn't end here, but the sound echoed from deeper within, so we continued onward. Soon, the scene at the end of the tunnel nearly suffocated us. Our flashlight illuminated the final room. Amidst the dim dust, we saw a woman's body, twisted in an unspeakably brutal manner, surrounded by several other dismembered bodies. This tragedy exceeded the cruelty of any war, seeming more like the work of some inhuman monster. We fled in terror, stumbling back through the tunnel. But in the room we had passed, the woman's cry rose again, helpless and urgent. Our hearts pounded like drums, our hands too weak to lift our guns. We knew no one survived deep in the tunnel, so how could that sound exist? Escaping the tunnel, we reported the situation to our commander, but I never mentioned that last cry. To this day, that cry and the twisted face of that woman still haunt my dreams, becoming an unsolvable mystery. A miserable soul's cry for help, forever lingering in that tunnel shrouded in death. Before I decided to join the Navy, I never imagined that the nights could be so long and lonely. I was stationed at a remote listening post where the sound of sparse shrubs and distant waves was the only sign of life. My task was simple: listen and record any potential enemy communication. But the monotony of the work soon bored and unsettled me. And before long, that unrest took on a specific shape: loneliness. One night, around 2 in the morning, as I rubbed my eyes trying to stay awake, my radio receiver suddenly picked up a strange signal. It was not the usual static of communication interference, but a muffled human voice. It was low, but I could distinguish that a man was speaking, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. I adjusted the radio frequency, trying to catch a clearer signal. As I concentrated on tuning the radio, I felt something move outside the window. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but when I looked up, I was sure it wasn't an illusion. There was a figure moving in the moonlight, seeming to wander just outside the listening station. I initially thought it might be a lost colleague or possibly a local villager, although it was highly unlikely for anyone to be wandering around here. I opened the door and looked out, calling, "Hey, need any help?" But there was no response, just the sea breeze and the sound of distant waves. I decided to go out and investigate. I knew it might not be the wisest choice, but curiosity overcame my judgment. I followed the direction of the figure I had seen earlier, but all I found was an intensifying fog and the deepening night. Just as I was about to give up and return to my post, the voice came again, this time clearer. It was so distinct, as if someone was speaking right into my ear. I stopped in my tracks and listened intently as the voice said, "Do not leave your post." I turned to quickly head back to my listening station, but I found that I had lost my bearings. Everything around me had become unrecognizable, and the fog had become so thick that I could barely see my own hands. Just when I was about to despair, I saw a faint light in the distance. I ran towards it desperately and found it was my listening station. I did not understand how I had lost my way or what that mysterious voice and figure were. I returned to my post, and the rest of the night passed unusually quiet. But I knew, whatever it was that tried to lead or mislead me that night, it was real, and it cast an unspeakable fear over the remainder of my service. After that night, I never dared to venture out alone again. Life at the listening post started to get eerie. At night, when I was alone in the listening station, the quietness was unbearable. The occasional sound of crashing waves that used to be my solace turned into a dreadful reminder of my solitude. My radio receiver inexplicably broke down one day, leaving me in an uncomfortable silence. I reported this to my higher-ups, who told me that due to the remoteness of my location, they would have to wait for a few days to get the necessary spare parts. Meanwhile, they instructed me to stay put and keep watch as usual. These were the longest few days of my life. Time seemed to distort here, ticking away at a torturous pace. In silence, every night was like a psychological battle for me. The shadows seemed to dance around, taking shapes and whispering in unheard voices. The ambiguous figure was still haunting me, appearing now and then around the listening station. As the nights prolonged, my terror started turning into an unbearable loneliness. I craved for human contact, for a sound other than the uncanny silence. Sleep was a far-fetched idea, for the nightmares haunted me there too. I tried to kill time by sorting out the old files and cleaning the station, but time indeed was a stubborn enemy. I neared my breaking point, and the darkness of the night seemed to seep into my soul. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the radio was repaired. The first human voice, that of my superior, reached my ears, and it was almost comforting, like a lifeline being thrown towards me. My relief was short-lived though, as the very next night my radio picked up the same distorted voice again. "Do not leave your post?" the voice echoed eerily. Not knowing how to react, I decided to keep it to myself. Days became weeks and weeks turned into months, with the voice appearing unpredictably, repeating the same phrase with an uncanny persistence. Until my service period came to an end, I continued to live under this terrifying mystery. Yet, wrapped within the terror, lay a lesson that was learned the hard way. I came to understand the grave meaning of the voice's continued warning and its inevitable consequence. The isolation and fear that were once my foes morphed into my companions, teaching me the strength of endurance and the power of resilience. As I was finally relieved from my post, I was no longer the same innocent recruit who had stepped into the Navy. The haunting nights, the incessant loneliness, and the terrifying voice had molded me into a man steeled by his terrifying experiences. To this day, I often find myself thinking about those endless nights and the strange enigma that was my companion in my solitude. Each wave crashing against the shore, each gust of wind, and the deafening silence all bring back memories of my time at the listening station. Nonetheless, it is these very experiences that made me the man I am today, a man equipped to face whatever comes his way. After all, if I could face the unexplainable, what else is there that could possibly scare me? I never imagined my military service would bring me such extraordinary experiences. This all happened when I was dispatched to a desolate, remote base in West Asia, an area only of desert and rocks stretching to the horizon. My duty was to patrol at night, ensuring the base's safety against all unknown threats. Typically, such tasks are monotonous and dull, but during a routine night patrol, I encountered the most unusual fear of my life. That night, the starry sky was dim, with only a sliver of a new moon providing a faint light. I patrolled along the perimeter of the base, rifle on my shoulder, accompanied only by the sound of my footsteps and the whispering wind through the sand. As I was lost in thought, An unusual sound came from behind a nearby dune, a slight but clear whisper. At first, I thought it was just the wind, perhaps my imagination. But the whispering sounded again, this time more clearly, accompanied by a mournful and deep chant. It was neither Arabic nor any language I was familiar with, yet it conveyed a profound sorrow. I stopped in my tracks, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound, which seemed to be calling me, guiding me to the top of the dune. Driven by duty and curiosity, I carefully climbed the slope, my heartbeat increasing, my hands tightly gripping my rifle, ready to confront any potential threat. When I reached the top of the dune and looked out over the sea of sand, the chanting gradually became louder, though its exact source remained elusive. Then, suddenly, I caught sight of a figure in the distance. In the desolate expanse of the desert, under the weak moonlight, a figure stood, their robe fluttering in the night breeze, as if speaking to the void. Their skin was as pale as the moonlight, stark against the surrounding desert. They did not notice me, or perhaps they simply did not care. I tried to get closer, but as if sensing my approach, the figure suddenly turned to look at me. In that moment, my breath nearly stopped. I realized that was no human. Its eyes were lifeless, its face contorted in pain as if silently screaming. Its gaze pierced through me, seemingly looking into another world. I instantly understood that what I was facing was beyond human comprehension. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. My heart pounded as if it would burst from my chest. I didn't stop until I reached my base, and then my dormitory, where I finally began to breathe heavily. After that night, I requested a transfer from that place, but that experience has been etched in my memory forever. I cannot explain what I saw, nor understand it, but I know that night, in the quiet desert, I had a brush with something ancient and mysterious.